Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever we find you, we wish you a good day. Lovely to be with you here today. We have a focus in the session today on the Western Pacific, Southeast Asian. My name is Catherine Duggan, known to many of you. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at FIP, and it's my honour today to be the chair of this session. Really delighted to be with you today. So we have some announcements to make about how the webinar will proceed today. We're recording this live and showing it on YouTube. You can always access this afterwards or encourage colleagues to. Additionally, you please ask questions using the question box provided, and we'll come to those during the session itself. And we have the chat box where you can do some introductions and welcome each other and basically get to know each other a little bit more. And we have the team on hand who can not only chat with you, but also support your questions. We'd love you to be able to provide feedback to us on webinar@fip.org, and of course, encourage you to become a member of FIP. Super to have you here today. So without further ado, let's move on. We've got the intro from me on this incredibly important week. We have apologies from Manjiri Garrett, who is an FIP Vice President, Member of Bureau, and also the Chair of the FIP Antimicrobial Resistance Commission. We've got some time today from some of our colleagues to share and showcase what they've done, what they've learned, so that we can kind of set the road ahead for the year that's coming. We've got a summary of the educational needs gathered from our Commonwealth Pharmacist Association colleagues, and that's a recording from their Chief Executive, Vicky Rutter. We've got the findings, the initial findings of the survey that we undertook here at FIP. A full report will come next year, but we wanted to give you some headlines. And then we have a bit of an interactive session for you, where we will gather the priority areas from you, where you have been working hard or developing or innovating or finding struggles. You can share on the questions as you hear about some of our attendees. Then I'll provide you with some concluding remarks and a wrap up and next steps. It's a really full packed agenda, and hopefully we will finish on time, but we have a lot to get through. So colleagues, as we find ourselves some 32 months into the COVID pandemic, and some of us at various points of exiting the pandemic and some of us at various points of new waves, we realize that we have a silent pandemic going on, or a potential silent pandemic going on with antimicrobial resistance. We all knew this was a huge threat to us globally on a health front. We also know, a little bit like climate change, these issues, if we don't address them, they just gain pace and gain traction. So for years now, FIP has been working hard on antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship. And we thought it was appropriate that when we got together after 3 years of being virtual in Seville, that we would launch a ONE FIP, that means across the whole of FIP, commitment to AMR and AMS. And that this would span not just the workforce or practice or services that we deliver, but education, practice, scientific research, endeavour, and workforce development. It's really important that we deliver these globally, step by step, but that each of you align what you're doing in practice for the most efficient way of us to do that. So we want to showcase country cases, we want to showcase regional roadmaps, we want to showcase how it's working for you, or the threats and challenges you have in your practice. This will form the feedback that I give at the end of the session, but it's really a good way for us to combine everything together, demonstrate to WHO their global call to action that we are part of the solution in the profession. So wonderful to be with you here today. The World Antimicrobial Awareness Week is one that we take really seriously. You'll see that we actually have one of the 21 FIP development goals devoted solely to antimicrobial stewardship, because we believe that without this, we have very poor outcomes in patient safety. Indeed, the threat to us all is huge. We want to be able to provide education and development headlines today, so that some of you in the countries where you have these needs can see how we can support you. But also those of you that have worked out some of those educational needs can share good practice. The two goals are communicable diseases and antimicrobial stewardship. They sit together like sister goals really, really closely. And of course, we have the other related goals as well. The commitments that we have launched will call for a call to action that will lead us into the Health Ministers Summit at the end of 2023, where all of your work and all of your showcases and case studies can be presented with evidence of impact when we meet those Health Ministers Summits. So those of you who are aware that World Antimicrobial Awareness Week is celebrated 18th to 24th of November every year, will also be aware that it's something we can't lose sight of at the rest of the year. The other 51 weeks of the year, we also need to be aware of antimicrobial resistance and what we can do to steward. That also includes drug discovery, drug repurposing, management of our antimicrobials, our value and precious antimicrobials and antibacterials out in practice. So today, we want to use this webinar as a bit of a workshop event. We encourage you to add your questions and your thoughts into the Q&A box, but also that we chat with each other, get to know each other, and really learn from each other. We want to outline the regional education and development headline needs so that we can set about making some of those happen and solving some of your problems. Outline the development goal areas and priority commitments for you and your organizations. And then after today, we will be working up plans on how you and we can support the contribution to 2023 and beyond. Really welcome everybody for being here. So the commitments are in very small text here, but they cover all the elements that I mentioned. And it gives us great pleasure to be able to pull together your work to create this global set of commitments to unite us all. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome via a recording Victoria Rutter, who is the CEO of the Commonwealth Pharmacists Association, who has put together some learnings from the events that we've undertaken in collaboration during this year. So over to Vicky.
Commonwealth Pharmacists Association. For those of you that do not know us, we are a charity that was established to lead and develop the pharmacy profession across the Commonwealth for the benefit of the people of the Commonwealth. And for those of you that have already joined us for the joint FIP CPA webinar series, AMS in Action, you will have learned more about our work in tackling AMR across the Commonwealth and beyond. We are delighted to have been able to host this series with FIP and have received fantastic feedback from attendees. Many of you may also be aware that in January this year, the landmark global research on antimicrobial resistance, or GRAM report, was published in The Lancet. This report, which reviewed data from 204 countries and territories, gives the best estimate yet of the scale of AMR globally. It reported that in 2019, 1.27 million deaths worldwide were attributable to AMR, making this the leading cause of death worldwide. AMR represents the largest threat to human health in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, but it is important in all regions of the world, with Australasia still reporting 6.5 deaths per 100,000 attributed to AMR. The CPA's work is predominantly with low and middle income countries such as those in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, who are disproportionately affected by AMR and many other health challenges, including health workforce shortages. As pharmacists, we have a very important role to play in trying to preserve our antimicrobial agents and keep them working. For those of you that attended webinar 1 of our joint webinar series with FIP, Pharmacists in Action, you would have seen this diagram that was presented by Dr. Nandini Shetty, Clinical and Scientific Advisor to the Fleming Fund, a UK aid fund that was set up to tackle AMR. With the ongoing global health workforce shortage, it is not surprising that many hospitals lack expertise in the form of clinical microbiologists and ID physicians, particularly in low and middle income countries. This makes appropriately trained pharmacists even more essential to help monitor and direct appropriate antimicrobial use. The CPA have been working with the Fleming Fund and our partners, the Tropical Health and Education Trust, to train and empower pharmacists to be better equipped to lead antimicrobial stewardship roles within multidisciplinary teams through our Commonwealth Partnerships in Antimicrobial Stewardship Programme, or CPAMS, as you may have heard it called. As part of the CPAMS programme, we've been able to determine learning needs for the profession across Commonwealth countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and have worked with pharmacists from these countries to build CPD courses delivered in collaboration with national pharmacy associations. You can see the titles of the current courses on screen here. Currently, they're only available to those who are members of the National Pharmacy Association that have been part of our pilot. But we will shortly be extending this to more members of national pharmacy associations, and in addition, launching a new individual membership option so that others outside of this network can benefit from the courses. In addition to this, we've established learning needs through a scoping exercise we recently undertook with a view of building a leadership fellowship programme for AMS pharmacists in Africa who are part of our CPAMS programme. And this is due to launch alongside our CPAMS 2 programme later next year. It is clear from our work that there is a lot of demand for development in this area, both in terms of building clinical competencies, but also having the opportunities to lead AMS projects, receive mentorship and training to enable people to be effective change agents. We recognise that at the same time, we need to advocate to governance and policymakers about the need to extend the role of pharmacists in many countries, creating opportunities and funded positions to deliver clinical services alongside traditional supply functions. In fact, this has been the approach to our work all along, and the need for this approach has been echoed by many health leaders and policymakers along our journey, such as the quote you can see on screen now from a senior AMR colleague in Sri Lanka during our visit back in 2016. We cannot change the world overnight, but by working together, we can increase the education of pharmacists in this area and contribute to equipping the workforce to take up AMS leadership positions. Our joint webinar series on AMR has been one stepping stone on this journey. This infographic illustrates the spread of attendance across the globe at our recent AMR webinar 1 that we held jointly with FIP. In fact, if we evaluate the whole series so far, it shows that we have had attendance from over 65 countries, which is fantastic. The graph on screen here shows the roles of attendees for our webinar 1, which is also reflective of the overall attendance at our webinar series so far, with just over 70% of attendees being pharmacists. This graph illustrates the current knowledge in AMS across our attendees, and it displays feedback from webinar 1, but is also representative of the webinar series so far, where almost 80% of attendees said that they were either new to or just had some knowledge of AMS, indicating the need for acquiring more knowledge. Over 96% of those completing feedback forms said their AMS knowledge had been improved after attending our webinar series so far. You have given us a wealth of information about topics you would like to see covered in the future also, which we are currently analysing to inform future programmes of work. So I think we can say that FIP and CPA are both contributing well to this space, but we have a long way to go. We need to do more. We've got a long way to go in raising educational standards around AMS for the pharmacy profession globally. We need to work collaboratively to share best practices. We need to advocate for the role of pharmacy in this space, and we need to support each other through policy and legislative changes that need to occur. We have to do this in order to strengthen health systems and improve the use of antimicrobials. It's our contribution to this. It's not going to solve the whole problem, but it's certainly something that we can do as a profession. Slowing down the development of AMR and preserving our antimicrobials is essential to improve outcomes for patients and to preserve our antimicrobials for future generations. FIP and CPA are on this journey together. Will you join us? Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your webinar.
Such an important statement there, colleagues. And I feel like sometimes it's important to think about going fast. So what we do alone as organisations or individuals can be important, but obviously where we want to go far and in a sustained way, as with antimicrobial stewardship, we just simply have to do it together and not duplicate. So that's FIP's role here. We want to do what you want us to do in this space, but we want to shine a light on what you're doing brilliantly. So let's move on to the next stage in our agenda. And I'm really, really delighted here to be able to present or introduce to you Usman here, who is Senior Lecturer, Discipline of Clinical Pharmacy, School of Pharmaceutical Sciences and University of Malaysia. And Usman has been so helpful and supportive with the FIP team in managing the survey, and is here to present some very high-level findings from the survey. The full report will be coming out next year, but we couldn't wait to share some of the hot off-the-press facts and findings with you. Dr. Usman, would you just take the floor, please? Welcome.
All right, thank you very much, Catherine, for the introduction. I think good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the part of the world you're joining us for. Today, I'm going to present the preliminary findings on the FIP antimicrobial resistance education survey. Before I proceed, I would like to thank the members of the AMR survey team, as well as the reviewers and all the respondents who participated in the survey across the globe. Slide, please. So as just a background to the survey and then to understand the rationale of the survey, as pharmacists, we play a very vital role in antimicrobial resistance, be it in the form of participating in antimicrobial stewardship, ensuring we supply quality antimicrobials, and even supporting infection control. But there is limited evidence to demonstrate the antimicrobial resistance educational content, as well as the AMR educational needs of the pharmaceutical workforce at a global level. This was the rationale of the survey. And evidence has shown that both healthcare workers and students want to improve their knowledge as well as competency through targeted and effective education and training on antimicrobial resistance. So we promised to share here high-level findings at the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week to identify the themes and priorities of our member organizations and nations to help us focus the work we do. 3, to support our commitments. The next slide. So the objective of the survey, briefly, we have 3 main objectives, and the 3 main objectives cover 3 different groups of participants. The first group of participants are the pharmacy educators, and for this group, our objective was to investigate the antimicrobial resistance educational component for the pharmaceutical work at a global level. And then for the second group of the participants, which is the pharmacy practitioners, we evaluated their perspective about regarding the relevance of the AMR educational components to their practice. The third group are the pharmacy student, and here we assessed student perspective on the AMR educational components. So we also took information regarding the best practices for this from the across the slide, please. All right, so in the methodology, generally we use a cross-sectional survey design, but we started off with the literature review in order to review what has been done, what's available in literature. So later on, we adapted a survey developed by the World Health Organization. After adapting the survey, we validated the survey, the questionnaire, and the questionnaire was validated by a panel of experts who are both lecturers as well as pharmacy practitioners. After the validation, we did a pilot testing, and the pilot testing included respondents from the 3 groups: pharmacy educators, pharmacy practitioners, and pharmacy students. And based on the feedbacks we received from the participants, we were able to modify the questionnaire. And then later on in August, we launched the survey. And the survey was actually launched through FIP's networks. Here we are today, after analyzing the result, to present the preliminary global findings. Later in the year 2023, detailed reports with both global and regional findings will be published. I think we'll move to the next slide. So for the scope of my presentation here today, I'm going to focus on the 5 themes of the survey, of the questionnaire that we use. And these 5 themes were developed based on the 5 modules recommended in the World Health Organization curriculum guide for pharmacist education. And these were aligned with the domains of the WHO AMR competency framework. For each of these themes, there is a competency statement. And the modules actually cover educational content that students with the knowledge, skills, and attitude for the 5 domains. The 5 domains are: 1, foundations that build knowledge and awareness of antimicrobial resistance. The second theme is appropriate use of antimicrobial agents. Third theme is infection prevention and control. The fourth one is diagnostic stewardship and surveillance. The fifth theme is ethics, leadership, communication, and governance. And we'll move to the next slide. So today we present only the global, high-level global findings and the recommendations to improve each of these themes. And then in 2023, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a detailed global and regional analysis, which along with case studies on education for antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship. We'll move to the next slide, please. So generally, in terms of the results, we were able to include 303 respondents in the analysis, and this includes 51 pharmacy educators from 27 countries, 108 pharmacy students from 39 countries, and 144 pharmacy practitioners from 42 countries. Generally, looking at the results, we had the European respondent accounted at the highest percentage for pharmacy educators and pharmacy students, while African respondents constitute the highest percentage for pharmacy practitioners. Move to the next slide. All right, so in the next few slides, I'm going to present the competency statement for each of these 5 themes before we move to the result and then the recommendations later on. For the first theme, which is the foundation that builds knowledge and awareness of antimicrobial resistance, the competency statement here is that pharmacists should be able to develop or should be able to demonstrate that they have knowledge and awareness of effective approaches to control antimicrobial resistance, and then the skills and attitude to implement changes according to role and level of training. Next slide. So the second theme, the competency statement here is that pharmacists should demonstrate that they have knowledge and understanding to facilitate optimal and safe use of antimicrobial agents for the management of infections. Next slide. The third theme, the competency statement, is pharmacists should demonstrate an understanding of the broad principle of infection prevention and control. This includes the WASH concept, and the use of the WASH concept to control and reduce the spread of antimicrobial resistance. Next slide. The fourth theme is diagnostic stewardship and surveillance, and the competency statement here is that pharmacists should demonstrate an understanding of the principles and processes of diagnostic stewardship, surveillance of antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship that underpin prophylaxis and treatment guidelines and antimicrobial resistance control strategies. Next slide. So the last theme, the competency statement for the last theme is that pharmacists should understand the concept of ethical practice, effective leadership, the importance of communication and good governance as important strategies that underpin the prevention and control of antimicrobial resistance. So next slide. In the next few slides, I'm going to present the recommendations and then briefly highlight on some of the findings that we had. So the recommendations are going to be for the 5 themes. The first theme is the foundation that builds the knowledge and awareness of antimicrobial resistance. Here we found that more than 90% of the respondents indicated that the knowledge element of this theme were embedded in education, but less than 80% indicated that the skills and attitude were embedded in the education. And from the perspective of pharmacy practitioners, we found that there was lack of using or applying some of these skills and attitude in practice. So now, and one of the major things we observed was that there was lack of emphasis on the use of pharmacogenomics for the selection of antimicrobials and even for antimicrobial resistance surveillance. So our recommendation for the first theme is to emphasize the relevance of pharmacogenomics for antimicrobial therapy selection, and then to diversify the teaching methods in AMR and AMS in order to improve the skills and the attitude component, and then to develop educational initiatives to raise public awareness as part of curricular or extracurricular activities. Next slide, please. Okay. For the second theme, here we found that more than 75% of the respondents indicated that the knowledge and attitude element for this theme was embedded in education, but only about 67% indicated that the skills components are embedded in education. And we also observed that there was lack of emphasis on the understanding of WHO strategy for optimizing use of antimicrobial agents. For this theme, our recommendation is to improve the methods of teaching to allow better delivery of the educational content, as the use of role play, flipped classroom, and small group discussions. We also emphasize that students should understand the WHO strategy for optimizing use of antimicrobials, including the AWARE classification. In the field of training, we also student involvement in spreading the awareness about proper use of antimicrobial is also something that should be incorporated in the curriculum. Next slide. So for the fourth theme, here we observed that most of the respondents indicated that the knowledge and skills element of this theme were embedded in education, but there was less focus on the attitude components. So we recommend that pharmacy students should be equipped with the skills to implement changes in infection control and prevention. And this should include both hand and environmental hygiene, screening of patients, vaccination, surveillance, and antimicrobial stewardship. Then to revise, the second recommendation is to revise the curriculum, the syllabi for subject dealing with infection prevention and control. That there will be more emphasis on understanding the values of monitoring and identifying contaminations. The third recommendation is practice-based infection prevention and control training. Next slide, please. So for the fourth theme, here we observe that there is really room for, there's a big room for improvement in this component, in this domain, because less than 65% of the respondents indicated that they're equipped with knowledge, and more than less than 50% indicated that of pharmacy practitioners indicated that they have their education has equipped them with the knowledge, skills, and attitude in diagnostic stewardship and surveillance for antimicrobials. So in this regard, we are recommending improving interdisciplinary teamwork with laboratory personnel, between the laboratory personnel, pharmacy personnel, nursing, as well as the infectious disease clinicians, and then to use in-person and written education to ensure clinician adoption and understanding of concept. Include antimicrobial stewardship among educational programs pertaining to infectious disease and therapeutics, and then include antimicrobial stewardship among training modules for pharmacy students during their internship, and to encourage research and surveillance, because usually we need to the approach, the antimicrobial resistance containment approach needs to be individualized based on the countries, based on the context of each country. So data is needed for structuring proper national plan to combat antimicrobial resistance. So the sixth recommendation for this theme is to provide laboratory-based education to clinicians to help them understand laboratory needs, workflow, and the purpose and importance of diagnostic interventions. Next slide, please. So for the fifth theme, here there was actually a big gap as well, because we noticed that there's room for improvement in delivering educational content that will pharmaceutical workforce with the skills and attitude in ethics, leadership, communication, and governance in antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship. So we recommend to add leadership, communication, and ethics as a vertical construct of pharmacy curricula. And it should not just be part of the educational process, it should be part of the educational process and not just as courses, as well as to expand on the content. For the content, excuse me, leadership for the content that can be expanded, leadership perspectives to consider may include costs, organizational goals, and staffing, while laboratory staff perspective may include clinical microbiology education or skills or skill level, and workflow considerations, governance on AMR, reporting methods to authorities as part of continuing education. Next slide, please. So generally, in addition to the close-ended, in addition to the close-ended questions, we included an open-ended question. Although we understand that the survey was based on the WHO curriculum guide, but the open-ended question offered us the opportunity to know the emerging themes that could be incorporated into the educational component from the survey. And some of the things we found were the role of pharmacists in pharmaceutical industry and sustainability. For example, the use of metagenomics as a tool to map microbial diversity, and then education on digitalization or antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship. Excuse me. Restructurization of the initial education of pharmaceutical workforce on antimicrobial resistance to emphasize and internalize the concepts, skills, and attitude for antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial stewardship. The last theme, that the emergent theme, was the change management and improvement science in the context of sustainable excuse me, was to change management and improvement science in the context of sustainable antimicrobial stewardship practices for combating antimicrobial resistance. Next, please. In conclusion, we get the conclusion and the next steps. First one is that education needs to prepare students for several roles. However, the fundamental knowledge, skills, and attitude is expected to be impacted by education, on which realization could be later. So the courses should shift from the know to the know-how, further applications to ensure that students are well equipped with both knowledge, skills, and attitude for combating antimicrobial resistance and promoting antimicrobial stewardship. Pharmacy workforce needs to be equipped with research, evaluation, clinical audits, as well as skills, as well as to familiarize them with international guidelines such as the World Health Organization that are used to promote appropriate use of antimicrobial agents. So we need understanding that one size fits all recommendation does not fit scope. So at the end of the day, our recommendations are going to be, we're going to have a general recommendation. Then we'll have specific recommendation based on the findings for each of the WHO regions. So we are going to prepare detailed reports that will showcase in-depth regional as well as global results. We'll also showcase case studies across the globe on AMR and AMS education. So we're expecting this report to be launched for next year. So I think with this, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your audience, and over to you, back to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Isman. Some really big key findings there. And I think what's really important is that the one size does not fit all, as Isman rightly said. So for us to be able to take learnings from each other, to see what works across different countries and regions is going to be super important. Thanks so much, Isman. I'll come back to you later, and for all of your help and support with us as an FIP team. We're really, really, truly grateful. Thank you. So let's move on now to our interactive segment. We've got great global speakers here with us today. And I'm going to hand over to the team now, who are going to walk you through all the presentations. And I think this is the place where the sharing and the showcasing comes into its own. So over to you, team.
Thank you, Catherine. So my name is Fiona and I'm from Australia, and I'll be facilitating together with Chen Yen to gather the priority commitments from areas around the Western Pacific, Southeast Asia and African regions, and then listening to those, doing a poll together with you to pull out what Usman said, to think what are our priorities for our regions, and then come to any questions that you might have as participants. But for our first speaker, I'd like to introduce Kristen Zenos. Dahlia is an apology, so just to mention that. But Kristen will be representing how we are combating the antimicrobial resistance in Australia through stewardship priorities and future directions. Kristen was
Hi, so am I right to make a start?
Yes, please.
Great, thanks, Jinyan. Sorry, I just missed it out there. So hi, everyone, I'm Kristen. I'm from Australia, as Fiona said, and I work at the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare. So I'd just like to give a bit of a brief overview about the origins of Australia's response to antimicrobial resistance. Started way back in 1999 with the first report that was submitted to Parliament, which was the Joint Expert Technical Advisory Committee on Antibiotic Resistance, otherwise known as JEDICAR. That evolved in 2015 to the first National Antimicrobial Resistance Strategy. And then that was over a 4-year implementation plan. And the key learnings of that were then revised again. So if we could just move on to the next. Yeah, thanks. So complementary to the implementation plan has also been the AURA surveillance system. And essentially that's looking at the way that antibiotics are used within Australia in different contexts, both in community settings and hospital settings. We also combine that with our antimicrobial resistance surveillance. So that's both a passive and a targeted surveillance. And you can see that our data sources come from many different places. And putting all those pieces together is done in our annual reports of the ORA reports. So most recently was the 2021 ORA report, which was the 4th report that had been produced considering Australia's use on antimicrobials and resistance patterns in Australia. So in 2020, following on from that first national strategy that I mentioned, there was a new national strategy that was released. And essentially that is a continuation of a lot of the findings, but more and more emerging and understanding that antimicrobials are used in all sectors, both in the acute sector and the primary care setting, and that tackling all settings where antimicrobials are used and making sure they're used in an optimum way is really an essential part of optimising Australia's response. So just to kind of give an overview of the Australian priority actions for targeting the way antimicrobials are optimised. So you can see here there are quite a few strategies. So clear governance, prevention of infection and resistance spread, engagement across different sectors, appropriate usage and stewardship practices for antimicrobial use, surveillance, collaboration, and strengthening global collaboration and partnerships. So just targeting in on the usage and stewardship practices for the priority actions. So I just have the next slide, please. So within the hospital setting, some of the key findings from the previous report that I mentioned, the 4th report on use and resistance in human health. So really targeting the inappropriate use of what are considered, may be considered, you know, agents that aren't necessarily high targets, but we consider them to be broader spectrum oral agents because there is so much usage of them, and that's what our surveillance was telling us. So for cephalaxin and amoxicillin and clavulanic acid, that was really the focus. Another key target area was for bronchitis and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and that information was coming to us from our national surveillance studies for antimicrobial appropriateness, so looking at how appropriate indications are, and COPD comes up as time and time again a real target area for optimizing the use of antimicrobials. Some other strategies have been, so community and aged care use is also another really important focus area. So we know that the majority of antimicrobials are used in the community setting as opposed to aged care, and there's been some concerning patterns regarding antimicrobial resistance. And especially in the aged care setting, following our Royal Commission into aged care, some of the concerns about antimicrobial use in that setting. Next slide, thanks. So just to align this with FIP's global commitments to AMR, so ensuring that there is effective, evidence-based, safe and responsible use of antimicrobials within the community in all sectors. So again, not just kind of focusing in on whatever sector is considered your area of expertise. So whether that's hospital or community, it's really taking a broader view of wherever antimicrobials might be used at that time, leveraging channels of communication. So considering how we share information and how it's going to reach the people that really need to be the change that needs to happen where antimicrobials are being used. So collaboration for developing wider strategies to rationalise antimicrobial consumption, supporting advancement in the pharmaceutical workforce, and also advocating for the inclusion of antimicrobial resistance in broader national medicine and pharmacy policies, where they're talking about medications in general, really bringing in that perspective for the added consideration of antimicrobials, which are unique in a class of their own, other than compared to other medications as well. Next slide, thanks. So going forward, considering strategic actions for addressing antimicrobial resistance in Australia. In 2023, the 5th report on antimicrobial use and resistance in human health will be released. So that will be the most up-to-date snapshot of how Australia is travelling in regards to antimicrobial use and resistance. We talked about the different settings. So aged care has been a real focus of late because of the Royal Commission, because of what's happening in the sector at the moment. So there's going to be revision of aged care quality standards which makes specific mention of antimicrobial stewardship, which again highlights the importance of that as a target area moving forward. Within the standards as well. Yeah, okay. No worries, that's okay. So just quickly to wrap up, yeah, then there's also the AMS book, which has responding to future areas of concern.
Thank you, Kristen. It is with pleasure that I introduce our next panelist from India, Professor Rup Gupta, who is the chairman of the Hospital Pharmacy Division and Vice President of the Indian Pharmaceutical Association. So Professor Gupta, you have the floor. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. First of all, I express my sincere thanks to FIP for giving me opportunity to share my views on AMR. You see, our Indian Pharmaceutical Association continuously works towards the development of pharmacy profession and establishing role of pharmacist as a true professional in healthcare system in India. Since antimicrobial resistance is a global health and development threat among masses and is associated with increasing mortality, treatment failure, and healthcare cost. Hence, in our country, our Indian Pharmaceutical Association has been arranging awareness program on antimicrobial resistance on regular basis. As it is known that AMR, antimicrobial resistance, happens when microorganisms such as bacteria, fungus, virus, and other parasites changes when they are exposed to antimicrobial drugs such as antibiotics, antifungals, antivirals, antimalarials, anthelmintics, etc. In general terms, antimicrobial resistance is the development by a disease causing microbe through mutation or gene transfer of the ability to survive exposure to an antimicrobial agent that was previously in an effective treatment. Hence, the appropriate prescribing of antibiotics is important to halt the spread of AMR. Now we have to make strategy. By slide you may show strategy. Our role of pharmacists, medical professionals, physicians, hospital, community, and clinical pharmacists has to play important role in this. They can make to control misuse, overuse, indiscriminate, overdose of antimicrobial drugs, and also to ensure appropriate choice, appropriate selection, dose, route, and duration of antibacterials, and its dose optimization. It is also required to observe community health record of patients. Now we may say it is a great service provided by our hospital, community, and clinical pharmacists in this control of AMR. Since the pharmacists are in direct contact of patients in hospital and in community pharmacy, hence they can do control prescription monitoring for inappropriate dose, indiscriminate use of antimicrobial agents, to perform role as educator and sensitizer about AMR, to arrange awareness program among masses for complying the dose, duration, and therapy as suggested by physicians, and they have to prevent self-medication by patients. Now, by this stewardship program, as suggested by FIP, by the stewardship program, we pharmacists will do help and reduce inappropriate prescription. We will limit the use of broad spectrum antibacterials. We will improve the clinical outcomes for the populations as a whole. We have to slow down the emergence of antimicrobial resistance, and we have to conserve healthcare resources. Lastly, it is suggested to arrange continuously awareness program on AMR by our pharmacists and our association on continuous basis. At the same time, it is required that there should be continuous education program is to be arranged for our pharmacists also, so that they should know the latest development, what are the going on, what is the antibiotics role, what are the new drugs are coming, so that by this continuing education program, we have to acquaint the pharmacist with the latest evidence for all antibacterials. So this will ensure pharmacists empowered to empowered to control this program. And we have confidence that by the role of pharmacists in contributing in the controlling the prescribing decision of physician, suggesting and to control by our patient counseling, we may be able to control this use of antibiotics, antibacterials, and we will be able to control this AMR. I hope our FIP has taken this AMR stewardship program. We will be done very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for highlighting some of the important roles Indian pharmacists play in combating AMR. It is with pleasure that I introduce our next panelist speaker from Indonesia. So Ms. Fitria Nur Hidayat is the clinical pharmacist from Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital. So Fitria, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, hello, good day everyone. Is my voice clear enough? Okay, thank you very much. I am Fitria Nurdaya. I am a clinical pharmacist in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital, and also I'm responsible in awareness and education of antimicrobial stewardship in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital. This is an Indonesian National Action Plan of Antimicrobial Resistance 2020 and 2024. You can access it in WHO, the regulation of the Coordinating Minister for Human Development and Cultural Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, number 7 of 2021, on the National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistance Control. This action plan tells us that to fight antimicrobial resistance, we must conduct one health system, cross-sectoral collaboration in fighting AMR, not only in human health, but also in animal and environment health. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the surveillance of antimicrobial use in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital. I presented at World Pharmacy Congress in Pharmaceutical Sciences Abu Dhabi 2019, and this surveillance tells us about the comparing of the antimicrobial use in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital in 2017 and 2018. This research to evaluate the effectiveness of the antimicrobial stewardship in our hospital. And we are very happy about this result because of the antimicrobial stewardship team in department. The result of the qualitative analysis, we use Giessen flow chart, decreased from the 40% to 30% of the 5th category. The 5th category tells about the antibiotic use is not indicated. So this finding, This finding shows that the antimicrobial stewardship team is really important in the hospital. Next slide. And this is the stewardship activities in Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital. We conduct the antimicrobial stewardship regulation, and the guidance and education training include Gemah Cermat. This is from the Ministry of Health. We collaborate with the citizen in Indonesia and also from the National Agency of Drug and Food Control. We educate others to use antimicrobial resistance with care. And also we conduct the audit for qualitative and also quantitative audit. For the quantitative audit, we collaborate with the Department of Pharmacy. We calculate the DDD ATC from the WHO category, and also in the audit of qualitative, we use Giessen flowchart. And we also educate in the social media. We use Instagram live show and the webinar. Next slide. And for this National Action Plan on Antimicrobial Resistant Control, we have 6 strategies for engagement in fighting EMR. The first strategy is what we are to do now. We celebrate World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. Happy World Antimicrobial Awareness Week all. And this is to raising awareness and understanding of EMR. And besides that, we also have online discussion, live show in Instagram, and also educate the patient or public to handle antimicrobial with care. The second strategy is EMR surveillance and research. Antimicrobial use and consumption surveillance, we use quantitative audit and also qualitative audit. In joint pattern, we report it twice a year and collaborate with clinical pathologists and microbiologists. And Indonesia also taking part on a global EMR surveillance system. The third strategy is infection prevention control. The goal of this strategy is reducing infection through sanitation, hygiene-related measures, as well as infection prevention and control. And the fourth strategy is the stewardship activities. We have a guidelines for the use of antibiotics for medical staff. And for the category, for the antibiotic, we have a category of access wards and also reserve. We use it with care. And also developing an integrated governance and coordination structure to control EMR. The fifth strategy is investing in a new treatment, diagnostic method, and vaccines to curb the spread of EMR. And the sixth strategy is we must make a coordination, developing an integrated governance and coordination structure to control EMR. So the first is awareness and also the surveillance, stewardship, and others. And we know that EMR is a global threat and we must take an action now. We understand what should we do. I want to encourage all of us here, be an EMR champion to prevent EMR together with superpower against superpower. Next slide. Maybe this is my last slide. Okay, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fitria, for sharing the fantastic work they're doing in the stewardship space in Indonesia. So we're just going to take a pause to encourage all attendees to take part in this poll question. Is it live yet? Okay. So you have a poll that will ask you to, which has a question on choosing the commitments which you think are most relevant to your practice setting in your institution and regional needs. And we will look back at the responses, and this will be discussed in our Q&A section of this session. Thank you. So I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker from Malaysia, so Dr. Syam Adnan. So Dr. Syam is the leader in the Antimicrobial Stewardship Focus Group for Pharmacists from the Malaysian Pharmacist Society, and she'll be presenting a talk on driving private sector engagement in antimicrobial stewardship programs as the global response to AMR. You have the floor, Syam. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll do very quickly with the presentation. to summarize what we do in Malaysia is quite a lot actually, but I don't put everything in here because of the time limitation. So before we launch, we do launch our National Action Plan on 2018, but we already have our National Antibiotic Guideline and Antibiotic Stewardship Protocol years before that. This my AAP is more of the collaborative effort between different ministry and different institutions. So I will focus on this in my presentation. Next slide, please. All right, since this is the objective, is actually in line with the WHO National Action Plan. So we have technical working group in all the objectives. We have technical working group 1, 2, 3, 4 for different objectives, and we collaborate with Ministry of Agriculture as well, and with veterinary, and also the one that who manage our water system and all that. Next, please. So if you see here, the numbers of organization and institution involved in the action plan is quite many. So we do engage with, I will focus on the pharmacist role. So we do engage with private healthcare pharmacists and also community pharmacists, and also the professional bodies like Malaysian Pharmacy Society, and I'm leading the Pharmacy Society focus group. Next, please. So one of the excellent outcome, I should say, is we managed to ban colistin to be used in agriculture. This is hard work between us and the veterinary section and also the industry. And eventually, we managed to ban the colistin to be used in agriculture after we have promised them that we are reserving this drug for our last resort for superbugs. Yeah, next. And one of the things that we want to push stewardship among private sectors is by incorporating the standard of antibiotic stewardship in our MHSQH accreditation certification. And those hospitals who are going for this accreditation program, they must do antibiotic stewardship. Initially, it's only infection control. AMS standards just new. And just to inform that I'm the National Preceptor for Antibiotic Stewardship Program for pharmacists in Malaysia, and Hospital Sungai Buloh is where I'm working now, is the ID Center, where the training center for antibiotic stewardship pharmacists. So in this standard, they have to do stewardship, and one of the requirements is to be trained. Next, please. So to support this, this is a standard. We incorporate both for infection control AMS. And this standard just recently launched, and currently all private hospital, in fact the public hospital, they have to go through this. Yeah, just the snapshot, I can't show you everything. Okay, next please. And we have done some briefing about the implementation of antibiotic stewardship for private sector hospital. For information, for public hospital is quite well established. There's a gap between public hospital and private hospital. So we are doing this training and talks to give awareness. All right. And to support this, our society, next please, we have antibiotic stewardship interest group under MAMSI. MAMSI is the focus group of antibiotic stewardship and the Malaysian Society of Infectious Disease. And this interest group is led by our ID physician. Is a collaborative effort, multidisciplinary pharmacists and ID physician together. And we have launched the online course to facilitate the implementation of the stewardship among doctors and pharmacists. That will be my last slide. Yep, thanks. And our action plan is under review. We have the performance report already published. I can show you the report is very lengthy, so we are now going towards the next 5 years plan. Yeah, sorry, that will be all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shah. That was fantastic, and thank you for sharing the roadmap for Malaysia's vision on AMS. And I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker from Nigeria, Onyeka Obidiegu, who will be presenting the regional priorities from Nigeria. Over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Chinyan. Next slide. So I'll be presenting briefly on Nigeria's, particularly the plans of the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria over the years on antimicrobial resistance. So Nigerian Action Plan for Antimicrobial Resistance, that was a survey done, found that antibiotics misuse was common with 42% of adults, which is very high, then 46.7 to 71.1% of 5-year-old children. And then 68.3% of adults use antibiotics without following the prescription, So studies have shown an alarming trend of resistance to antibiotics and the death of antimicrobial awareness over the years. And this has led to interventions by the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. So this report is showing the interventions over the years by the PSN, Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. Next slide, please. So globally, WHO estimates that resistant infections are causing 700,000 deaths every year, and then 230,000 deaths from multi-drug resistance TB. So, and by 2050, it's estimated that 10 million people will die annually from drug-resistant infection, causing $100 trillion in economic losses. And for Nigeria, which is a developing country, this is something to take very seriously. Next slide, please. So engaging in his advocacy for funding of AMR. So the vanguard for AMR and AMS is coordinated by the NCDC in Nigeria. I don't know if I can be heard. Okay, I'll just continue. I can't show my video from here, but since you can hear me, no problem. So the vanguard for AMR and AMS is coordinated by the NCDC in Nigeria through its technical working group. So the NCDC is the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. So it's drawn from the environment, agricultural, and human health. So the center has achieved a lot with partnership from international partners, but funding from the national government remains an issue. So to provide effective oversight and surveillance of these emerging resistant pathogens, we all know that funds are necessary. Next slide, please. So in the next calendar year, the PSN is committing to more advocacy visits and lobbying for more government support to the NCDC, and by extension, AMR, while leveraging on our expertise and spread as pharmacists to continue our local campaigns. So currently, through the local chapters of PSN, we engage every world, and this is in line with FIP AMR Commitment 7, which is strengthening regulatory system through quality assurance, post-marketing surveillance. Next slide, please. So I don't know if I can be heard. Please, a thumbs up would be nice. Sorry, I'm having network issues. I'll continue. So another priority of ours is arresting chaotic drug distribution. So through advocacy by the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, the federal government has deployed the Coordinated Wholesale Center to curb drug distribution gaps in the country. So this is one of our serious issues because most times drug distribution in the country is very chaotic and doesn't go through pharmacists and people that are actually skilled in the handling of drugs, which is just pharmacists. So the PSN and the ACPN is the Association of Community Pharmacists in Nigeria, has also deployed online centers. So these online centers are meant for drug orders by pharmacies. It's just a way to make sure that the supply chain is very valid and intact, and then the validity of the drugs, the integrity of the drug can be assured. So the impact of falsified and counterfeit medicines on antimicrobial resistance from some of these uncertified distributors cannot be overstated. Next slide, please. So in the next calendar year, in addition to our efforts in the past, the PSN is committing to continue advocacy through nationwide CWC coverage that has coordinated wholesale centers. So this CWC has been kicked off in 4 states already in the country and is gaining speed. So, but PSN is committing to more nationwide coverage so that we may achieve 12 out of 36 states, or maybe 20 out of 36 states, while using these online centers as a stopgap. It's good to know that this action by the PSN is also in line with FIP AMR Commitment 7, which is strengthening regulatory systems through quality assurance, post-marketing and post-marketing surveillance to combat substandard and falsified medicine. Next slide, please. So the role of also the last priority that I want to take because of time is the role of public enlightenment. We know that public enlightenment cannot be overstated. It's very key in the fight against AMR, as most times irrational drug use may be due to emotions like fear of infection or simply ignorance. So most people, instead of going to the pharmacies or seeking drug advice, they prefer to do what they feel is best for them. So the PSN has really used this as a tool across the states with support and partnership with the media. So partnership with the government on enlightenment through the NOA. The NOA is the National Orientation Agency, will unlock new milestones on coverage for public enlightenment. And this is what we want to achieve. Next slide, please. So in the next calendar year, the PSN commits to reinforcing our enlightenment efforts through the media while advocating for veritable partnership with the government. This is in line with FIPMR Commitment 2, which is leveraging these channels of communication. Next slide. Okay. In conclusion, there are other efforts we have, which includes educating, reinforcing the knowledge level of lecturers, and then reaching out to students to make sure the curriculum is in order. But due to time, I'll leave it for another day. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Onyeka, for a fantastic talk, and looking forward to what comes next in the next year in the AMS space in Nigeria. I'd like to introduce our last speaker, panelist speaker, Michelle Gisela. Michelle is the head of clinical pharmacy services and antimicrobial stewardship at Life Healthcare in South Africa. Michelle, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, first of all, to the International Pharmaceutical Federation for this initiative to bring pharmacists across the world together to discuss this very important topic of AMR. Next slide, please. The South African National Department of Health appointed a ministerial advisory committee on antimicrobial resistance, which has multifunctional representation, including clinical pharmacy. And one of the key functions of this committee is to compile a report on antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use on an annual basis, of which enhanced surveillance remains a key focus. The role of this committee is to advise the Minister of Health on the appropriate approach to the country to improve antimicrobial use and standardize AMS across all sectors in South Africa. And these sectors include antimicrobial use in human health, animal health, agriculture, and then in water and waste management. Next slide, please. Okay, one of our key initiatives this year is to have a week-long AMS campaign discussing topics relevant to the South African national strategy on antimicrobial resistance. So the agenda can be seen there. Next slide, please. Okay, so IMS education for healthcare workers has previously been insufficient. So this has now corrected over the last couple of years. However, there's a large number of qualified healthcare workers that do not have the appropriate training in antimicrobial stewardship. So our National Department of Health launched an online antimicrobial resistance short course to provide continuous education to healthcare workers registered with the Health Professional Council of South Africa, the South African Nursing Council, the South African Veterinary Council, and the South African Pharmacy Council. And the aim of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, which I'm a member of, is to enforce continuous professional development on antimicrobial resistance through legislation. The next slide, please. Okay, so in South Africa, there's a great disparity between priorities in antimicrobial stewardship in the public sector compared to the private sector. In the private sector, medicines can be accessed far easier, as can be seen in these pie charts. And there's a clear difference between the use of the World Health Organization's reserve antibiotics in the two sectors. The focus in the public sector is to ensure, for example, that facilities have access to the very basics of resources, such as urine dipsticks, hand sanitizers, and just have access to the access antibiotics. Whereas in the private sector, there's easier access to a lot of the medications, and the aim there is to reduce inappropriate antibiotic use, to increase the use of diagnostics to guide therapy. And pharmacists play a key role in influencing prescribing here, as in South Africa, the private hospitals are not permitted to appoint doctors. So doctors can admit in these facilities, but the hospital cannot enforce any sort of restrictive policies in terms of antimicrobial prescribing legally. So pharmacists therefore play a key role here in influencing antimicrobial prescribing in the private sector. Next slide, please. Here is an example of antimicrobial resistance surveillance that we do in South Africa that's published in our annual report. And Klebsiella pneumoniae is an organism that we are very concerned about, as susceptibility to last-line antibiotics such as carbapenem is declining. And this emphasizes the critical role of pharmacists in assessing the appropriateness of every carbapenem and every other reserve antibiotic prescription. Next slide, please. So the improvement plans for South Africa for 2023 and beyond include introducing retrospective AMS training for medical professionals that have already been registered with the relevant societies and councils, to enhance awareness of infection prevention and control, such as encouraging vaccinations and the basics such as hand hygiene, to restrict last-line antibiotics where other options are available, national monitoring of antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. As in our country, we do not have the resources to collate information in terms of antimicrobial use in the community versus in the healthcare institutions. And then we obviously want to, in the public sector, enhance access to first-line antibiotic resources, as often they need to result in using last-line antibiotics because of access issues to very basics. And then we would like to enhance the use of diagnostics to guide antibiotic therapy and extend the scope of surveillance and implement restrictive measures for antimicrobial prescribing in the community. I think that was the last slide.
Right, thank you, Michelle. And thank you to all our speakers. So now I think we will go to a panel discussion and ask if anyone has any questions. If all the speakers could please put their videos on. And I believe that the poll will also be put up to give people more of an opportunity to read through, because there was quite a lot of text in that. And my first question is to Catherine, and it comes from Asif Yari from Afghanistan, who says, thank you very much for the opportunity. Could you please let us know what support FIP will provide us if we plan and conduct antimicrobial resistance orientation sessions in the country in different parts?
So Fiona, it's a great question, isn't it? Because FIP will never tell you what you need to do in your country, but if you come up with a bit of a plan and you need some support, we'd be very happy to do that with you, and also to partner you up with other countries that may have skills in that area. So when we finish all of these sessions on this amazing week, where it brings it to the forefront, different countries are going to have different sets of priorities. That's what the question was asking. That doesn't mean that they only have one priority out of that. That's just their first one. So it might be, Fiona, we would tell our colleagues that we could, would tell Asif that in Afghanistan, if you need help with events or with maybe with advocacy, with letters that go to health ministers, with examples from other countries, this often works very, very well. We can come up with a bespoke offering to help support country by country. So as I say, it is all dependent on that country's needs. And if you need help with events, or if you just need to showcase these events again, that's often a very, very good, helpful way, Fiona, I think. What we see today is examples from very different countries, the same issue, very different approaches, because it's based on your national need. So I think with Asif's, we wouldn't want to impose a solution, but we're here to help create a solution with them.
And just from my experience in the FIP AMR Commission is that you don't have to start from scratch. You know, you can always ask for help and share, and we can build and help each other. You know, that's part of the benefit of the community.
Well, I think, Fiona, you know, it's unethical to watch countries start from scratch when there's so much learning across the different regions, the different countries. We did an event like this yesterday, looking at the other regions, and they have brilliant examples. So maybe if people just sit back with a cup of tea and listen to the other events, you might also pick up some gems there. But Fiona, it's really, really important that FIP provides this platform to equalise and to share good practice. And for those that have developed, to give an opportunity to those that have needs. It's really satisfying. It really makes our world more united in pharmacy, I think. Thank you so much, Fiona. I also see, Fiona, in the question box, there's another one about prescribing. And I think as we gather the evidence where countries are making sure that antibiotics are prescription only, we'll use the examples for other countries and we can start to do some advocacy directly to health ministers. As I mentioned, we're not going to impose one size fits all. Usman said that to us in the survey, but also we do know that sometimes when you put in place some of these policies in other countries, they work really, really well. So we'll take a watching brief and come up with solutions for all the countries. I think that's enough from me, Fiona. You have marvelous experts here, but anything else from a FIP perspective, I'm on the panel.
This one might be for Michelle and Onyeka because it's around Africa, but also happy for anyone else to jump in. So Frank Batana asks, what do you also think of the impact of the drug in the hands of non-pharmacists on the streets in Africa in the development of resistance?
So I'll go first. Thank you, Fiona, and such a relevant question. In South Africa, we were under the impression that antimicrobials are not available without a prescription because that's what our legislation says. However, a recent study published by one of my colleagues at the University of Pretoria showed that they used actors to request antimicrobials from dispensary, community-based dispensaries. And those actors were able to access antimicrobials. They had scripted queries on how to ask the pharmacist eventually just if they could please just have an antimicrobial. They obviously never paid for it and took it home, but the reality is that there's definitely a need for strengthening legislation. So theoretically, it shouldn't be available on the streets. However, we have unfortunately discovered through studies like this that it can be accessed without a prescription.
And I think that it's across lots of regions. So I have a colleague in, I'll let you speak next, Onyeka, in Sri Lanka, and there's many countries where this is an issue. So I think it's relevant across lots of regions. Onyeka, did you have some comments to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, just like I responded to the previous question, the roadmap to ensuring no one gets a prescription is not supposed to get. It's a quite storied one. It may look like a simple problem, but steps involved in making sure that what's supposed to happen happens and be quite tumultuous, especially from a Nigerian perspective, as I've seen. But the most important thing, for example, accessing drugs without prescriptions starts with who has access to bringing drugs into a country. That's where the question starts from. And in order to get that right, that requires legislation, that requires politics, that requires a lot of consultations and stuff. But for African countries mainly, I would recommend that if there will be a documentation of everything that's needed, step by step, to achieve a level of nobody gets drugs without prescriptions, especially the ethical medicines, the antibiotics. So there can be one step achieved per year. It will be a great gains. For example, here in Nigeria, I think for a very long time we've focused on who brings in drugs to the country. So that's been our focus for some time. And you look at it and be like, okay, yeah, the progress is not so much, but then we're achieving that minor goal, which will make sure that the doors open to making sure that antimicrobial resistance is checked. And another thing that I would like to add is that most times, because of how broad AMR and AMS is, it's so important to achieve this. We overlook the importance of small steps. So must always remember that even as broad as AMR and AMS is, especially for African countries, we can look at a subset and okay, we'll start with this and then we'll move on to the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we're going to get ready now to share with you the results, which will help identify the FIP priorities to our local context. And just as you're aware, so FIP provide a lot of support, but you have to think about what will be applicable to my region and my country. And here the votes have come in. So the question is, FIP commits to increasing the awareness of AMR and strengthening AMS in a variety of ways. Which of the following strategies do you think your practice setting institutional country needs or would benefit from to reduce AMR? And the number one was promoting the effective evidence-based, safe and responsible use of antimicrobials within the community and all sectors at 82%. Next one was building leadership capacity, collaborating with multidisciplinary teams and various stakeholders to develop wider strategies and guidelines. Does anyone want to comment on those two as to why they're important or how maybe in their country they've approached that? So the first one was evidence-based. safe and responsible use of antimicrobials in the community in all sectors. And the second one was around leadership capacity and having multidisciplinary teams.
Attendees, like, you feel welcome to enter your responses to the chat box as well to participate in a discussion about why you've chosen this priority. Seems to be unanimous response and agreement about promoting a One Health approach and how we use antimicrobials across all sectors.
May I give my insight from the poll? So I think what we need is to identify KOP, or what we call as key opinion leaders, before you start promoting your program, and it can be from your community. And in Malaysia, we call them is our ambassador. But the ambassador that we have right now in Malaysia is for our pharmacy program. We call it ambassador for drug. Drug in Malaysia, they call it as ubat. So they are known as ambassador for ubat, and they are doing active awareness program in their community, and they are given proper training. And I believe it does work in other countries as well, because KOP or key opinion leader is well known to be effective in enhancing any program. But you really have to identify who are they.
That's wonderful.
Are these
I was going to say public.
champions?
No, you go, Chinyan. We're talking too excited about your wonderful comment.
No, are these ambassadors champions in the community advocating for I guess judicious antimicrobial use in the community sector?
They are actually for our general program for drugs, proper use of medicine. To be exact, the 5B. We have 5 use it properly, correctly, and all that. But AMR is already incorporated in one of the training module, and we have our materials, training materials, our posters for the public. And each time they do campaign, they will have that one booth talking about AMR.
I was just going to comment that so much antimicrobial use is in the community, and it's all often harder to measure. So I think that's really interesting that that's come up as the first priority, because everyone sees such a need for work in that space. And I noticed Kristen mentioned that as a priority area for Australia as well going forward around community use, as well as some of the other countries. So thank you for sharing that, Tiamha.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add to what she said. It's also very, very, very important way to spread the message of antimicrobial use. For example, in Nigeria, we have these radio shows organized by the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria. You know, most people might not watch the TV, but they always listen to the radio. So we do like a 30-minute broadcast every month. And I can tell you through that, you hear a lot of questions, people call in, and then you provide advice, and then you direct them to where they can also get further information if it's needed. So her talking about champions reminded me of that, and that's also a way.
So Onyeka, I think if we gather some of these really practical ways, many countries can just implement them. It might be harder in some, but the more you have a menu of options, the more choice we have for colleagues. Fiona and Chinyan, I just wanted to mention that in the background, the team have been looking at the priorities from yesterday, and it's almost a mirror image. It's almost exactly. So what this helps FIP, we will still support everybody with everything, but it just means we can focus in your country on 1 or 2 areas of priority. So I think it's been a very helpful exercise. It means we still have to do all the other bits as well. It's just the first one is a different one on each person's list, each country's list. We also want to be able to showcase these really powerful initiatives, like the radio initiative is just great, the champions is just great. Let us know what we can do with other professions. We sit in an alliance with the doctors, the nurses, the physios, and the dentists. So let us know what we can take to them and do in collaboration. Small steps. The more small steps we do, the further we get. So I think it's very, very encouraging. Thanks so much, colleagues.
I think we're approaching the end of the session. It's 9:30. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all our panelist speakers, so Kristen, Professor Gupta, Fitria, Sham, Onyeka, and Michelle for contributing your time tonight to present all the great work that you're doing in respective regions. And thank you for all the attendees for attending the webinar. Are there any final remarks from Fiona or Catherine?
No, my only final remarks, Chinyen, is just thank you so much to everybody for sharing all of their initiatives, all of their plans, all of their priorities. I think the panel gave me an opportunity to really say next steps. We'll come up with a bit of a plan for how we can support some countries in depth, but also showcase other countries' work for others to learn from. Fiona mentions the Commission can also be a bit of a portal. We use it for expert advice and support for FIP, but what about putting in queries and questions from the wider membership into the Commission directly, and we can triage our support there. And then my final point here is the one size fits all, one size doesn't fit all mantra really showcased today. I just think the presentations we heard in the Global Showcase was so great. I would encourage you all to listen to yesterday's as well, because it's very humbling at FIP to hear what great initiatives you're all doing. And I noted, Ruth, you mentioned, will FIP take forward our initiatives? We certainly will. Thank you so much. Thanks a million, Fiona and Chinyen, and thanks to the team as well, and to Usman for presenting the education reports. A huge thanks from me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all soon and take care. Yes, we will. We're here to support you. Take care, colleagues.